Hey everyone, I'm Peter Rawlis and welcome to Boise State in the Community. Joining us today is Neil Carter, who's a professor here at Boise State. Hello Neil, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
So to start things off, tell us where you're from and what brought you to Boise State.
Where I'm originally from?
Yeah.
I'm originally from San Diego, and I've moved all around, been in the Midwest, been on the East Coast, and now I'm in Idaho.
Now what made you choose Boise State?
I chose Boise State because it's got such awesome programs. It also has a lot of really great wildlife and wilderness areas, and my work is in conservation, so that's a huge plus for me. It also has fantastic people, and so it just had all the things that I wanted in a future career.
So what got you interested in wildlife conservation?
Yeah, so I mean, at a very early age, you know, in that stage where people are starting to think about what they want to do for the rest of their lives, nothing else really interested me at all. And I started thinking about animals and working with animals. And I thought for a while that the only thing I knew about working with animals was to be a veterinarian, which it turns out is doing things to animals that I definitely did not want to do. I had no idea what that actually meant. I just knew animals, veterinarian. So then my parents basically turned me on to this idea of conservation and the need for conservation and wildlife and management. So I've been doing it ever since, and it's really fun and I love it.
So what does that entail?
Boy, how long is this thing? Yeah, because it's going to take a few hours to talk about it. Well, basically, in a nutshell, it entails understanding what it is that wildlife need, and understands some of the impacts that people might have on wildlife, and it understands, obviously, the things that they need to survive with those impacts, and basically understanding our relationships to wildlife and making sure that they're viable and they, you know, have their lives, but that also we get values and things out from having wildlife in these ecosystems.
So what are some of the things that people have to do, or yourself, to make sure that these wildlife creatures, you know, have a safe environment for themselves to live in? Yeah,
well, I think one of the key things is to let people know that they have certain wildlife in their neighborhoods, in their backyards. Let them know what the values of these wildlife are for people. A lot of times people know, particularly if they do a lot of outdoor work, or you know, they spend a lot of time outdoors, but a lot of people don't do that, and they still really love and value and care about wildlife. So I think one of the key things is just letting people know that they're there and that there's a lot of cool things that wildlife do, and they're really important to keeping, you know, forests and ecosystems healthy. I think that's probably the most important thing.
What are some of the issues that face wildlife here in Boise?
I think one of the key issues facing Boise is just our general growth and development trajectory. So one of the cool things about Boise is that we can take advantage of a lot of the wildlife and wildness around us, but that's going to change as the city grows, and the city's projected to grow pretty quickly. So I think right now we're at a very critical juncture where city planners need to think very carefully about how they'd like to see the city grow, and the people who live here should think carefully about what do we want in this growth, what do we want to maintain, and what do we not care about if we lose.
So during your time here in Boise, what are some of the changes or impacts you've seen happen over the years?
Well, you know, I've only been in Boise for a couple years, so I don't have a whole lot, I don't have a huge record to tell you how much it's changed. I can tell you that a lot of people are talking about the changes that are occurring, and I'm asking a lot of people that very question. What types of things are you seeing that's changing development-wise? Highways, roads, residential development, things that as a wildlife conservation person that I would be concerned about. So I'm trying to get a handle on that. But in terms of my own tenure here, I haven't seen enough change yet.
So with your time here, what are some of the courses that you teach here at Boise State?
So I'm participating in 2 courses. I lead a course called Foundations in Human Environment Systems Science. And then I'm also co-teaching a course called Research Methods in Human Environment Systems Science.
So what are some of the things that students can learn in those classes?
Yeah, so in the Foundations course in particular, I teach students about some of the core ideas in sustainability science and environmental conservation, and especially the ways that people and ecosystems interact and interface. And so what can we do to bring social sciences and natural sciences together to understand these issues and try to resolve them?
Now, is there opportunities for students not only to be working within the classroom, but outside the classroom as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this course in particular, and conservation in general, I think is a great area for students to participate in their communities and work with partners, because it's so, I think, relevant to just everyday people. You know, like, you don't have to be an expert. You can just know that the environment is really important and wildlife is really important. So I think it lends itself extremely well to those types of opportunities.
Now, what are some types of projects that students can get involved with?
Yeah, so I can give you some examples of projects that the last class did, because they were pretty cool.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think. So the students in the Foundations course, they interacted with a number of local partners, and that was Idaho Conservation League, Idaho Department of Fish and Game, Idaho National Guard, Greater Yellowstone Coalition, all these different organizations that they reached out to and said, hey, we have this project, we have an idea for a project, does this meet your needs? And the community partners came back and said, yeah, it meets some of our needs, but we also have some other things that we're really interested in. And so they worked with the partners to figure out this nice sweet spot where they could provide something for the partners, but also they were doing a project that fulfilled the class expectations. And so they were doing projects on understanding wildlife disease, particularly squirrel plague, projects on fire recovery. And Idaho obviously has a lot of issues with fire, and that's only going to increase. So understanding the ways that you manage fire recovery, working with the Greater Yellowstone Coalition to understand what would happen if grizzly bears are delisted. Another project was looking at specifically this issue of development in the Boise foothills, and what can we do to understand the trade-offs of that growth in terms of impacts on the environment. So a lot of cool projects.
And what was the reaction of the partners to this idea? Were they open to it at first?
I think they were all really open to it. I think the important thing is that the groups needed to make sure that the partners had a need being met, so they didn't feel like they were being burdened, you know, like, hey, we're going to do this thing for you, hopefully it's something that you're interested in. And I think that really helped. Also, I give credit to the students because they took their time and they really talked to these partners. They were thoughtful and, you know, respected their time and their needs. I did get a call from someone at the Idaho Conservation League just out of the blue that said, hey, one of your student groups came by and we chatted, and they were really thoughtful and great, and this is really cool. I'm really excited that they did that. So I think overall it was a really positive, favorable reaction.
That's great. And what kind of time commitment do students have to put into this?
It varied. I think it probably was about 10 to 20% of the total course load. Okay. And like any course, it fluctuates. You know, there's nothing for a few weeks, and then all of a sudden there's like a mad dash to do a whole bunch of things because I'm like, you need to turn this in at this time. But I think basically it wasn't too much that it was taking away from their learning and education, but I think it was enough that it felt like a commitment. Like you couldn't just not do it and have something fly by. Like you needed to really invest some time. So yeah.
So have you seen these projects be implemented, or are they still kind of working it out with the partners?
I think they've all been implemented. So most of the products involved fact sheets. For example, they had a fact sheet with Idaho Conservation League about fire recovery and sort of what are the key issues in fire recovery to expedite that process. There was also some presentations that a group gave to Boise High School and the environmental science classes about human environment systems. What is it? What does that mean? How does that relate to development in the foothills? So yeah, everybody has finished up their projects and have like a concrete thing that they could give their partners.
That's great. And what has been like the students' reaction to this? Have you noticed they really kind of, came into this with open arms and really wanted to grab hold of it?
Yeah, totally. I think at first there was a little bit of reticence because I was asking them to make the connection to the partners, which I think for anybody is always a little bit daunting because it's like cold calling, cold emailing.
Yeah.
But I said it's an important process to do. So I think once they got over that initial fear of sort of reaching out to people, and they got into a groove and they were coordinating with somebody, and then I think it went really, really smoothly, and I think they enjoyed it. And that example of the Boise High School class, they used that group used that experience to do a poster about the connection between science and education, and the poster was presented here at Boise State.
And how have you noticed students how does this process affect their learning for what they're trying to get into as a career?
Yeah, so I think one of the challenges in doing science is sometimes it's very easy to feel science start to drift away from really day-to-day, real-world issues and problems, even though, of course, science is meant to be a way to resolve real-world, day-to-day problems. But just it's one of those things where you can get caught up in the science and the research and kind of lose that vision. And so I think this is a really important opportunity for students to reconnect those two worlds, and that research and science can be done in a way that is exciting from the purely scientific area, but it also can be highly useful and applicable to all these local organizations and partners and local communities. So I think making that connection is something that I like to do personally and try to maintain that, but also I think for students it says you can still do science and still be engaged as a citizen and helping improve your community, and I think that was pretty rewarding.
So what type of careers do students usually get into after going through these type of programs?
Well, honestly, I think that it ranges a lot. In terms of conservation, I think that it gets people poised for both either a scientific career, academic career, or a career in the public sector in particular, or even nonprofit organizations. There's a lot of nonprofit organizations that do conservation work, and they have to interact with communities. They have to figure out what the community priorities are, the expectations, and then they have to deliver something that meets those expectations. So you can't just go into the ivory tower, so to speak, and do your research. You have to make sure it's useful for those communities. So I think any of those different sectors, public, nonprofit, or academics, I think it can still position students to be, really competitive and doing really cool things in any of those different sectors.
So besides the projects, what other types of things are the students learning within the class?
So the core thing we're teaching is this idea of human environment systems. And in a nutshell, it simply means that we depend on the environment, but we also impact the environment. And so there's this really tight coupling between the two. So anything that we're doing to affect our environment is likely having a feedback on our own well-being. And so it just treats that as a fundamental concept. And then we try to understand then when we look at issues of environmental change, instead of looking at it from a lens of how we just impact the environment, we also need to look at the feedback of how it affects us. And so everything is fed through that lens. It's global climate change, it's water shortages or drought or conservation. All of it can feed back into our own well-being.
So besides teaching, what other work do you do outside of the classroom for yourself?
So my main research area is in conservation of large mammals, and especially those that can come into conflict with people, like large carnivores, bears, wolves. My PhD work was on tigers in Nepal. And part of the reason I focus on those animals is because they're on the extreme end of everything. Like, they're big, they can be very dangerous, but they're also highly charismatic and valued. I mean, people around the world know about these animals on these different regions. And so there's a lot of money and interest and time and sweat and tears and blood that is being invested from around the world into these animals. But on the local communities, it can be very hard to live with those animals. So it creates a really interesting tension and trade-off, and those trade-offs between the importance of protecting them but also minimizing the conflicts and impacts is where my research lies mostly.
And my final question for you is that is there a website or a place where people could go to learn more about this or get involved? Yeah,
so the two big websites I can give right now is the cid.boisestate/HES. It's essentially the Human Environment Systems website, which is under the College of Innovation and Design. And then the work that my particular research group is doing is the coexistencegroup.com.
All right, great. Well, that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for coming in. And I really appreciate you talking with me today, and I wish you all the best in all your future endeavors.
Thank you.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. I'm Peter Rawls. You've been watching Boise State in the Community. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.